There are wounds in life that do not come from enemies, strangers, or the harshness of the world, but from the very people we love the most. And among all relationships, the bond between a father and a son is one of the deepest, strongest, and most sacred, built not only on blood, but on trust, sacrifice, and silent expectations that are rarely spoken out loud. And when that trust is broken, it does not break loudly, it breaks quietly, slowly, and painfully, leaving scars that are invisible to the world, but heavy enough to bend even the strongest shoulders. And today I want to share a story that is not just about betrayal, but about responsibility, choices, regret, and the long road back to inner strength. Because this is not just a story about a son who betrayed his father. It is a story about what happens when values are forgotten and when strength is misunderstood. This father was not a perfect man, but he was a good one. The kind of man who woke up early not because life was easy, but because responsibility demanded it. A man who worked through exhaustion, disappointment, and fear so his family could have stability. And like many fathers, he did not speak much about his sacrifices, because he believed that real love does not need applause. It only needs purpose. And his son grew up watching this strength, absorbing it, learning from it, or at least that is what the father believed. Because in his heart, he trusted that the values he lived by were being passed down, not through lectures, but through example, through presence, through consistency. The son was intelligent, ambitious, and full of potential, and the father saw his own younger self in him, perhaps too clearly, and that was the beginning of the blind spot. Because when we see ourselves in someone, we often trust them more than we should. And the father trusted his son not only with responsibilities, but with decisions, with opportunities, and eventually with things that carried real weight, real consequences, and real risk, believing that trust would shape the boy into a man, believing that responsibility would build character, and believing that love alone would be enough to guide him. But life tests character when no one is watching, and strength is revealed not when things are easy, but when temptation is strong. And slowly, quietly, the son began to change, not in obvious ways, not in ways that immediately raised alarms, but in subtle shifts, small compromises, little justifications that seemed harmless at first, choices made in private that contradicted the values he had been taught. And like many betrayals, it did not begin with a single dramatic act. It began with silence, with avoidance, with half-truths, with the slow erosion of honesty. The son convinced himself that he deserved more, that he knew better, that his father was outdated, too strict, too cautious, too slow for a world that demanded speed and boldness. And instead of having the courage to speak openly, instead of earning independence through integrity, he chose shortcuts. And shortcuts always demand a price, even if the bill arrives later. And when the moment came where honesty was required, where truth would have preserved dignity, the son chose deception, believing that the ends would justify the means, believing that the damage would be temporary, believing that his father would never truly find out. But betrayal has a way of revealing itself, not always through exposure, but through consequences. And when the father finally realized what had happened, it was not anger that hit first, it was confusion. The kind that leaves you questioning your own judgment, your own awareness, your own role in what went wrong. Because betrayal from a stranger hurts the heart, but betrayal from a child shakes identity. And the father was left wondering where he failed, what signs he missed, and whether love had made him weak or blind. There is a moment in every life where strength must be redefined. And for this father, that moment arrived not in a battlefield, not in a public defeat, but in a quiet realization that the son he raised had made a choice that could not be undone. And strength in that moment was not about punishment, revenge, or control. It was about restraint, about holding pain without letting it turn into bitterness, about facing reality without denying it, and about deciding what kind of man he would be in the face of disappointment. For the son, the realization came differently, because betrayal feels powerful at first. It feels like control, like independence, like winning, but power built on dishonesty is unstable. And when consequences began to unfold, when trust was withdrawn, when respect was lost, the son felt something he had never felt before. Not fear of punishment, but fear of becoming someone unrecognizable. And regret does not scream, it whispers, it lingers, it keeps you awake at night, asking questions you are not ready to answer. This story is not about declaring villains or saints, because life is rarely that simple. It is about understanding that choices define us more than intentions, that love does not erase accountability, and that strength is not proven by taking advantage of trust, but by protecting it, especially when it would be easier not to. And on this daily path to strength, this lesson matters deeply, because many people believe strength means dominance, independence without responsibility, or freedom without discipline. But real strength is the ability to carry responsibility, even when no one forces you to, even when no one is watching, even when temptation promises faster rewards. The father eventually faced a choice of his own, whether to cut ties completely or to set boundaries that were firm but fair, because forgiveness without accountability is weakness, but accountability without compassion is cruelty. And finding the balance requires wisdom, not ego. And he chose a path that was not easy, but necessary, a path that allowed consequences to stand while leaving the door open for growth, not because betrayal did not matter, but because growth still did. And that decision required more strength than anger ever could. For the son, rebuilding trust was not about words, apologies, or promises. It was about consistency, humility, and patience, because trust lost in moments can take years to rebuild, and sometimes it never fully returns to what it was. And that is one of the hardest lessons of adulthood, that some damage cannot be reversed, only managed. And that maturity means accepting responsibility without demanding instant forgiveness. And whether the son ultimately redeemed himself is not the point of this story. The point is that every listener must ask themselves where they stand, not as a son or a father specifically, but as a human being trusted by others. Because betrayal is not limited to families, it appears in friendships, partnerships, workplaces, and communities. And the core question remains the same. What kind of person are you when trust is placed in your hands? Do you protect it, or do you exploit it? Do you honor those who believed in you, or do you justify harming them for short-term gain? And on the daily path to strength, this question defines the journey, because strength is not loud, it is consistent, it is disciplined, it is principled, and it shows up when no one is clapping. This story reminds us that parents are not invincible, that fathers carry silent hopes, and that sons carry silent pressures. And when communication fails, assumptions grow. And when assumptions grow, mistakes multiply. And while betrayal may break trust, it also reveals truth about character, about values, and about the work that still needs to be done within ourselves. And the greatest strength we can develop is the courage to face that truth honestly. So if you're listening today and you are a son, remember that trust is a gift, not a guarantee. And if you are a father, remember that guidance does not end with childhood, but neither does accountability. And if you are simply a person walking your own path, remember that every choice you make either strengthens or weakens the foundation of your life, and no success built on betrayal ever stands long enough to be enjoyed. This is why strength must be daily, intentional, and rooted in values that do not change with convenience, because life will test you, not with obvious evils, but with reasonable excuses. And the strongest people are not those who never face temptation, but those who refuse to sacrifice integrity for comfort. And as you continue on your own daily path to strength, choose to be someone whose word means something, whose loyalty is steady, and whose character remains intact even when the opportunity to betray is quietly placed in front of you. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance a father can leave a son, and the greatest legacy a son can honor, is integrity.